Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. We are so happy to be here with you. Today's webinar is focused on KPI Driven Innovation and specifically how you can use KPIs to help support more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems. This webinar is part of our broader work called the Venture Equity Project, which conducts research to find out what factors contribute to more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems where women, people of color, and people of all genders have the opportunity to succeed as entrepreneurs, no matter their background, no matter their geographic location. We're very excited that we published our latest report, Revitalizing Innovation, which you can find on our website, which looked at the states in the US that are doing the best job of supporting entrepreneurs of all walks of life. And today we're featuring some of the organizations that we highlighted on our report. And we're excited for you to hear from leaders to talk about how they're leveraging KPIs in their organizations. I want to take time to thank the sponsors of the Venture Equity Project, JP Morgan Chase and Nasdaq. Their support has made our 4-year research project possible, and we will continue this work, and we invite all of you to join in the journey of the Venture Equity Project. There's a few ways that you can get involved. One is being on this webinar. We encourage you to ask questions, put your questions in the chat. We will dedicate the last 15 minutes to your questions. Second, you can download our report. And third, you can sign up for our newsletter, which has a whole host of ways that you can get involved with our ongoing research. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Professor Ozkazanc-Pan, Banu, who is a professor at Brown University. She is the Barrett Hazeltine Professor and Director of the Venture Capital Inclusion Lab. Banu is going to moderate our wonderful panel and will our panelists to you. So thank you, Banu, for being here, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome to everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to start out by inviting Thom and Michelle on and asking them to introduce themselves and then getting right into our questions. And Michelle, I'm going to start with you. After your introduction, if you can share with us the mission and vision of your organization, and then Thom, I will ask you the same. So welcome everyone, and let's get started.
Well, thank you. So my name is Michelle Lura White, and I work for the state of Illinois' economic engine, the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, or DCO for short. And I'm a team member with the Office of Economic Equity and Empowerment, or OE3 for short. With the state of Illinois having the 18th largest economy in the world, being the top Midwest state, for business creation, and having export sales for over 78 billion in 2023, we are proud to have over 1.2 million small businesses who call Illinois home. My team, the Office of OE3, we advocate for equitable economic opportunities across the state of Illinois for minorities, women, veteran-owned businesses, businesses owned by persons with disabilities, and other underserved communities. We're one of the most unique state government offices in the US, if not the only one who provides such a laser-focused programming and services for underserved communities. We are in-house entrepreneurs who are also statewide connectors to cross-sector resources and opportunities. In my role as the Illinois liaison to the women's entrepreneurial ecosystem, one of my many tasks is to strategize how the state could work with amazing cross-sector organizations and leaders throughout Illinois, as well as outside the state, to help advance Illinois women-owned businesses, who make up about 42% of all small businesses in the state and who make up about 19 billion in annual payroll.
Oh, Michelle, thank you so much for that. I think those are very impressive and maybe stats that everyone should know. Thom, I'm going to come on over to you.
Hello, I'd like to thank the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center for this opportunity. It's always nice when you get some external validation to the work you're doing, as most on this call probably know it can be at times a thankless job. My name is Thom Ruhe. I have the good fortune to lead NC IDEA, and we are an independent private foundation. So 501c3 structured as a PF, functioning as an economic development organization in the state of North Carolina. We, the official mission statement, if you will, is to strengthen the economy of North Carolina through a strategic portfolio of grants and programs delivered directly and through a partnership of other ecosystem partners to help people realize their entrepreneurial potential. I would say informally, what we're really striving to do is tap the world's greatest natural resource, and that is the entrepreneurial potential of everyone. And we do that, as I said, through a strategic portfolio of grants and programs. We are celebrating all of 2025. We'll be celebrating our 20th year in existence, and I am the second CEO taking over from the founder in March of 2016. So coming up on my 9-year anniversary, and looking forward to share. I don't know if you want to get into any of our data yet,
Yeah,
but
that actually gets right nicely dovetails into my next question, which is, Thom, NC IDEA Foundation has gone through a remarkable transformation since you started working there, leading it, really shifting its grant funding from primarily focusing on white male recipients to serving a much more diverse entrepreneurial base. And what specific KPIs or key performance indicators and measurement systems drove this transformation in your funding approach?
So those of us that have been doing this for a while, right? We have to acknowledge the historical context. In '05, that was the vintage year. Well, plus or minus a couple of years, everybody was kind of jumping on the T-bed bandwagon, right? So tech-based economic development. The model back then was be in regions with academia clusters, so where you have universities. We have the good fortune of the triangle, what's referred to as the triangle, which is really the geographic points of NC State, Carolina, and Duke. And so if you set out to do and fund, high growth potential in that type of a geographic predisposition, it was kind of inevitable you were going to fund a bunch of white guys, at whatever university with an app that fill in the blank. So I want to make sure I don't make the point that it was intentional that 90% of our funding went to white males in the major metro areas of North Carolina. It was kind of a natural byproduct. It could have been, predicted with a little bit of experience. And so there was nothing, quote, wrong with that. But times changed, and so did best practices in economic development and supporting, innovation clusters and other place-based economic development best practices. And so as it came around the time that I was to join, I was very interested in kind of bringing an equity lens to this work and redefining with an equity lens how this type of technology-based economic development, or if we replace the word technology with just high impact, right, and be a little more generic because it can mean different things in different places. And the board that hired me, shared that value and said, by all means, let's do that. Let's go statewide and let's have that lens. So what we had to do is we had to start by measuring everything. And by everything, I mean everything to every one of our programs. So in our grant program, we have considered our B2C strategy. We make direct grants to founders with high potential companies. And these are true grants. This is not a convertible note. It's not equity. It's not debt. It is free money. And we do that through a competitive cycle twice a year, spring and fall. We currently have 2 such programs, our micro grant program, which are $10,000 grants, and our seed grant program, which are $50,000 grants. And like I said, we do that twice a year, spring and fall. And so we had to, if we were going to focus on being equitable in that process, we had to start measuring everything from, the gross number of applications we get, top line, top of funnel. But then, what percentage of those applications, are Black founders, brown founders, rural, female. And then as we go through the process and we take that gross application pool and we narrow it down to semifinalists, based upon, again, a criteria and a process that includes, many core reviewers and other volunteers. Well, then what's the percentage, right? So if, let's say in the gross pool, we had 20%, Black founders make up the 200 applications we might get for seed. Well, when we cut the group down to semifinalists, are we still at 20%? Did we go up as an aggregate, or have we gone down? And then from semifinalists, we measure it to finalists. And then from finalists, we measure to who actually gets a grant. We obsess over the data at each breakpoint and figure out how we can tweak on the margins to, better those numbers. And what that does, and what it does in our case, is it informs programming on our B2B side of the house, which is our ecosystem partner programs. So where we see breakdowns, and where we have seen over the years breakdowns, are like, okay, we're doing okay in the number of, let's say, minority applicants at the the top level, but they really fall off, going through the process. So where's the deficiency? And the deficiency is on, coaching and mentoring and other technical skills, usually something, some basket, combination of all that. So that informed grants that we made and we make on our ecosystem, our B2B side of the house. So we seek out partners that serve these underserved communities and provide that upskilling and access that's necessary to make them more competitive. And so we do this, and again, we obsess on the data on each side of the house with every cycle. And over time, and that's the secret to this work, right? You just keep grinding it out. Over time, in obsessing over the data, we start seeing movement in the right direction. But it's more than just at the kind of the core level, people participating. It's also on what we do. So, from the reviewer pool, for example, again, if you go back to the history of the organization, the majority of the people that were reviewing those grant applications, they represented the capital stack in the state of North Carolina, which, surprise, middle-aged white guys. And I understand the irony that a middle-aged white guy is saying that, but that was the pool. And so you can't ignore the fact that if that is the majority of the people, kind of passing judgment and making the decision, the outcomes might skew a certain way. So we had to become very aggressive at recruiting, people with diverse backgrounds, and not only just, racial, but also geographic. I mean, North Carolina is a state that's got 40% of the population lives in a rural community. It's one of the top states with that much of a percentage in the rural. So, we had to be very, very intentional as to where we pulled people from to ask to participate in the review process, and then see where the deficits are at each breakpoint.
Really, thank you for that very detailed explanation. It sounds like you did an audit of your processes and practices and looked at where you could improve so that everybody has an opportunity for participating in the economy through entrepreneurship. So thank you for that. Michelle.
Well, let me just add. So here's the punchline, right? So we started at 90% white male major metro. Now 70% of all of our funding goes to women, minority, and rural.
Mm-hmm.
And not because we've excluded any given demographic or applicant pool. Sorry, I didn't want to.
No, I think we
Michelle's time.
appreciate these nuances, particularly in times when, there's a lot of scrutiny and discussion, and how do we move forward, making sure everybody benefits from the opportunities, particularly in states where the breakdowns might look a little bit different. Michelle, coming from private and nonprofit sectors into state government, how did you approach establishing a baseline measurement for women entrepreneurs in Illinois? And what key performance indicators have been most valuable for you as you're tracking progress?
Well, I'm fortunate that our administration and my direct supervisor, allows me and my colleagues to be in-house entrepreneurs, where I myself is able to incorporate practices from my previous experiences in the private and nonprofit sectors and apply them in the government space. So before I made recommendations, I first looked at the information, that my office had or didn't have regarding women entrepreneurs when I first came on board before making my suggestions. As I noticed that we didn't have any stored previous data on the women entrepreneurs, such as the ones that are attending our events, I made sure to make that recommendation that we keep this information so we could track that progression and save that historical information, because I'm a geek about data and saving information. Next, I looked at the type of data that we were asking in our events, and I noticed that we were only asking questions such as like name, title, organization, city, community that you identify with, but nothing else. And then based on that, how could I, as a data-driven geek, get a sense of who is attending these events tailored for, women entrepreneurs, such as business stage level or industry, teams who are better, equipped, are able to address things once they have, data. So with that, I presented to my then supervisor that, I wanted to gather this information on women programming that I led, and I provided the reasons why and the benefits. After that, I was given the green light. For the most part, there was a few questions I kind of asked because it was too much going from basic info and then all of a sudden accelerating to all these inquiries. Which I understood, but at least it was like a start, asking more, questions, such as the business stage levels and industries. So, given my, multiple, and so I was given the green light, and so I've been, collecting, that info, given my multiple priorities and, serving women-owned businesses, throughout the state, my time is very limited. So, I really, keep track of like all the things that, I, do and whatnot. And so one thing that I've been doing, that I did recently was taking a deep dive into the monthly e-news that I developed, tailored for women entrepreneurs, not only for my office, but for the Illinois Women's Business Collective that I had the honor of leading. And so in 2024, the average open rate for these emails was 50%. So, I took the average of the two industry leaders in the email marketing world, which is Constant Contact and MailChimp, where they say, email open rate is 25%. So, I'm 25% the industry benchmark. But for I myself, like to, continue to increase that, because for me, I want to empower not only the women entrepreneurs, but the cross-sector stakeholders to support them. So I want to empower them with that knowledge. And so anyone who's ever been in charge of creating content, developing e-blast, you know that it takes a lot of time, to create these e-news. And so, what I'll be doing is, taking, a step back for, this coming year, looking at, going from, monthly e-news to maybe quarterly, but I'm going to combine, together, with my colleagues and my direct supervisor, going to identify components to help increase those open rates and click rates, such as coming up, is it different catchy subject lines or, design format. And then for 2025, I'll look into other KPIs. I also want to mention, as I was blessed to given this opportunity to incorporate data collection, once I started this role and, continuing on, I expanded this data collection, sharing concept with other offices within my state agency and other state agencies, and, sharing that data, which I know has not been historically a thing, that's very common, in different government spaces. But everybody's been on board, and this is where, I've created a centralized, info data graphic of not only my state agency support and impacts for women entrepreneurs, but also for other state, other agencies, throughout the state of Illinois. And next month, I should have that 2024 data.
Really, thank you for that, Michelle. I think I hear from both of you that data collection is important, and each of you, given your certain context that you're in, decide which data should be collected, should be valued, and then you sort of create implementation based on that. I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the application processes and data collection. I'm going to come back to you, Thom. What changes did NCID make to its grant application to sort of better understand and serve the needs of diverse entrepreneurs, whether they have a rural background, they're women, they're minority? And in sort of speaking to this, could you share some specific examples of how you redesigned the application process to capture more meaningful metrics, and if any surprise insights emerged?
Sure. I like to say, since we serve entrepreneurs, we have to eat our own dog food, and that means being very willing to experiment and try new things. So in the earliest days, when we didn't have the micro grant program, we revamped who was in the room helping, with the decision making. We were trying to aggregate around the application process, and we weren't quite seeing the movement that we wanted. We kind of hit a plateau. And so we opined, and this is where the data helped us actually not just even tweak the process, but create a new program. The theory we had was that we could juice the number coming into the top of the funnel, but that's where they fell off, going from just a regular applicant to a semifinalist. And they were falling off based upon the fact that they weren't far enough, well, for a host of reasons. So as I alluded to earlier, some might be just lack sophistication and experience in like writing a good application. So we fund partners that help in that one. But the other part of it was, it's still a competition, right? They were still maybe pre-revenue. They weren't even at MVP yet. So our thesis was we have to figure out a way to have an earlier intervention to catch these, applicants and specifically historically underserved populations at an earlier stage that still have a high potential idea, and not just in the conventional sense that they'll go raise private equity, right? Because a company that can generate 25 jobs in a rural community is by our definition high impact. So, and we have that luxury as a private foundation, right? We're not beholden to anybody. We can kind of make up the rules as we go. And so it's our choice that high impact is that lens. And so we thought, okay, if we have an earlier intervention, we'll probably or hopefully have an opportunity to discover more high potential, people in these underserved groups. And I'm happy to report 6-ish years later, that's exactly what it did for us. So when we started tracking those numbers, by doing the micro application. So yes, it's way earlier stage. And as I had to say to my board, right, like we have to expect a higher failure rate because, we are not an angel fund. We're not investing equity in hopes of return. We're out there finding diamonds in the rough. And so our thesis was if we go earlier in the intervention, we'll find more people, diverse group, pursuing ideas of high potential. But once you're a grantee, you're in the family, to use our vernacular. And there's a whole suite of programming that then opens up to you that we can surround you with, and networks and events. And so we make up for a lot of what in, say, their rural communities where you don't have a monthly, 1 million cups or an angel fund that you can go pitch to. So they're in, our family then. And then within 12, as a matter of fact, criteria of making a micro grant is that we hope within 2 to 4 cycles, you're competitive for a seed grant. And that's precisely what has happened. So fast forward now to the present, I think we're trending about 45% of seed grantees have been prior micro grantees. And when we started the micro program, we saw all of our numbers in, minority applicants, female and rural, just go up exponentially. It's still a competition, right? So we still kind of use a blind lens to, so to speak, but that really, that theory we had that if we found a reason, a way to intervene earlier, bore out what we were hoping it would. And so that's why it's now a permanent program that we do. And it's been a great feeder to all of that. And so that's how we use those KPIs, not only to tweak the existing portfolio, but to create new portfolio so that we could be more successful at that overarching goal of just being as equitable as possible, in the work that we do.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Sounds like it's still a competition. You're just ensuring that there's more, um, you know, competitors that
The
are,
fair fight, right?
it's a fair fight,
Economic development historically has always been, even that's been equity focused, has said, the metaphor I use, and forgive the sports reference, but, think of a baseball field and there's a little league team out there playing, and here come the New York Yankees. And we say to them, oh, little league team, go ahead and play the Yankees. You guys are playing the same game. It's baseball, right? The equipment's the same. It's a ball, it's a bat, it's mitt. But the people that are underserved, they're in this metaphor, they're the little league team playing against the pros, and it's not a fair fight. It's not a level playing field. Everything we do is really targeted at leveling the playing field and then letting the process be the process. And we've discovered now that if you level the playing field, the numbers are much more diverse,
and
as
it's
it should
really
be.
nice to hear that, just as is that everyone gets a fair chance, and you're
Yep.
ensuring that that happens. Michelle, I'm gonna turn back to you. You're planning to build a centralized data system for women entrepreneurs, and I'm wondering what key data points are you tracking, and how do these metrics inform your support programs in Illinois?
Well, yes. Before I go into that, one of the top inquiries that I always receive is from women entrepreneurs is like, I need funding. And I also hear very often, state government and elected officials, you don't do anything to help women entrepreneurs, and your agency to help secure financial funding. And that's where, I say here in Illinois, we offer, a wide range of different financial capital funding programs, opportunities, and tools. And so one area, that I'd like to track, through future key data points will include tracking women who've been taking advantage of my office, OE3's monthly financial capital webinar, online with OE3, which we share cross-sector resources and opportunities to all attendees. In that webinar, we also allow it for attendees to ask us questions live, and which we also follow up with an email recap. So I would like to take to see who's been attending these webinars, and then also and who's additional financial capital webinars, and then once we we have assessment of like who's been receiving different grants, seeing if they've the ones who've been grant recipients, have they taken advantage of any of our free programs and tools. And then that's where set up a conversation with my colleagues and my direct supervisor, as well as leaders in a financial capital ecosystem. Are there things that we could be better to be doing to help get the message across about these free programs and tools focused on financial capital. Also with this internal CRM, like to see like Arlene, am I seeing certain parts of the state where women are getting more taking advantage of these programs and receiving the grants? Are there particular industries? And then that will help me to see who are our allies in those different communities that are helping us disseminate the information to women entrepreneurs and other underserved entrepreneur communities. Another key data point like to track is like, once I make a lot of, recommendations and referrals, to different financial capital resources or leaders, I want to see that, once I make that introduction to them, how long does it take for them to receive funding, and, how much are they receiving, that funding? This is where, have to look into creating, like a post survey, if they're willing to, to share that, that information. And I also have to keep in mind that many women entrepreneurs, many of them are dealing with a double shift, such as taking care of their children, their elders, or both. So that might affect them, once I give them that recommendation or that referral, it might take them a while, to make that, quick follow-up. I'd also like to, the CRM is just also seeing, have they been utilizing these state programs and resources outside financial capital, that I've been referring them to. And then also mentoring programs. So I get a lot of inquiries about different types of cohort accelerator mentoring programs. So, want to, track, they say that they need this help. I, share the recommendation. Have they followed up with applying to those external programs available to them? So there's a lot more with, with the, internal CRM, but at least, tracking that information will help me and my colleagues and Direct Super harness that data effectively so we could create many more opportunities, in our ecosystem to provide support.
Thank you for that. What I'm hearing from both of you is, one, you've both sort of constantly diagnosing sort of the issues and challenges that are being faced by different founders and entrepreneurs in your ecosystems, and then making sure that you're asking the right collection or asking the right questions, collecting the right data. And then moving forward to implementation, I think this is one of the key areas. So I'm going to come to you, Thom, and ask you, in our conversation, you've talked about the Black Entrepreneurship Council and the new Rural Entrepreneurship Council that has sort of been created. I'm wondering how those came to be based on your data-driven approach, and how do you structure your KPIs so that you're able to identify these kinds of gaps that hopefully these councils will address? What metrics do you use to measure the effectiveness of these kinds of councils and other interventions?
So both of those initiatives, specifically the Black Entrepreneurship Council, which we founded about 5 years ago now, were really kind of, it was the result of wanting to have greater, yet another leverage point. And here's what I mean by that. And you ask, like, what metrics do we use to make those decisions? We look at, the simple population distribution in the state, right? We are 21% Black in the state of North Carolina. And if general grants were tracking at 5 to 7, 8%. Like, we're not at the population distribution. The rural population of the state of North Carolina is about 40% of the total population live in rural, and we're seeing maybe 17% of grants going to rural founders, right? These are the data points that are informing these metrics. So what we really did with the BEC in particular was we said, okay, let's correct for or control for limitations in our own thinking, right? I can have the ambition and the desire to fund more Black and brown founders, but as a middle-aged white guy, leader of this organization, there's probably some gaps in my lived experience that will limit how effective we can do that. So in what is best described as an example of trust-based philanthropy, we impaneled a council of 25 individuals from all across the state representing the population we wanted to serve. And we said, help guide us and really prioritize what our spending priorities and our funding priorities should be in service of, Black founders. And we learned a lot. We've created a playbook for this. We understand, again, it was not unlike the portfolio of NC Idea, at the top level. It's a similar, we're going to fund ecosystem partners that are helping, Black founders. We're going to do some engagement. We're going to do some growth grants. That was actually the first priority. So what, the data shows was that despite Black founders that can get out of the gate, there's limitations in their growth cycle because they don't have debt capacity and access to funding networks that white founders traditionally do. So we made growth grants. The seed grant was $50,000. We went through our entire pool of Black founded companies, and based upon a criteria that the BEC ordained to be, how we would measure, we selected several of these grantees to receive an additional $75,000. So now taking, total grant funding for those particular founders up to $125,000. And I'll remind again, this is free money. And subsequent, funding priorities based upon what the council says. And so we think we have, we're $2.5 million later through that program. We've got some great data track record. So We feel like we've figured out a playbook for this, and now we turned our attention to doing something similar for the rural community. And I'll add here, because I've seen some of the questions coming in. There's some question about like, well, what are we measuring, after post award? All grantees are contractually bound to provide data. They have to participate in our annual survey where they provide data to us once a year. And in fact, just because of how much they appreciate being supported by us, we have some that I think are in their 16th or 17th year still providing data. So we know in our 20th year of service, we have helped, we've supported and funded 600-ish companies. They have collectively created over 5,000 jobs. They've raised over $1 billion in private equity. There's been about 36 exits. They've created a bunch of wealth in North Carolina to the early funds that jumped in. The economic impact of that activity is measured in billions. And so that kind of helps us stay the course that, clearly there's something working here. So it's not just on the front end and then we, congratulations, we wish you well. We keep with them. And then they in fact help, keep the ecosystem vibrant, because a lot of them engage and then function as mentors to grantees that come up, 5, 6, 7 years after them.
So it sounds like you've created a wonderful virtuous cycle of, creating through your micro lending pipeline all the way out, post graduation, that you have a really vibrant and iterative ecosystem. I wanted to come back to you, Michelle, focusing on some of these implementation questions and even challenges. With your focus on creating a 360 view of entrepreneurs, how are you measuring the effectiveness of the various cross-sector collaborations you mentioned and the support networks? And for you, what metrics have proven to be most meaningful?
Well, one way of measuring effectiveness of the cross-sector participation in Illinois is involvement with the statewide Illinois Women's Business Collective that I manage and lead on behalf of the state, which consists of cross-sector organizations. Since relaunching it in the fourth quarter in 2021, when months after I arrived in state government, I've grown participation by close to 800%. And echoing Thom's beginning comments, thanking the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center, want to thank them too, for recognizing our work in their national VEP report, which highlighted Illinois' 4 business collectives, in particular the one that I lead. With being, state government, and this is not your traditional membership-based, group, we don't have like a set goal of like, X amount of meetings you attend or that you must contribute, this to these initiatives. But we're just so that, we've had these many cross-sector organizations who believe in the work, believe in collaboration, and participate by saying, hey, I want to attend these meetings, I want to receive these updates. That we send out, like how can I share this information. With this metric, it just shows that how organizations, including government, we could be innovative and pilot these initiatives which have never been done before. This growth is just a small fraction of all the different organizations throughout Illinois who support entrepreneurs. And I identified, and again, as I said, this is a small portion. I just identified organizations who are already doing great work, who'd be a great fit to contribute to the Illinois Women's Business Collective, whether it's based on their industry, based on their work on support for different business stage levels, or they're focused on specific community, underrepresented communities. And I also also keep in mind that I have a lot of other things that I'm working on, so I don't have 100% bandwidth to be focused on the collective. So that's where not able to take it to the stage I'd like to take it to, but well in the near future. But in terms of the collective, we've been discussing about building an internal referral system that the different organizations who do choose to participate, that we're sharing different forms of capital that women need that we could track. And these forms of capital, include financial capital, which we all know could take different forms, whether it's loans, grants, human capital, like the staffing needs. And one of the most important types of capital that we don't talk enough about is the social capital, which are the networks, like the mentors, the sponsors, cohort programs, and networking events. So when we do build this piloted referral system through the collective, we're going to see how long it takes for participating organizations, to make those referrals to other organizations who have, unique, programs and services. And when we do this, we will need to have, clear model and goals, including like a timeline towards our long-term, outcomes. Before we even get to that point, we are, categorizing organizations and their programs based on the different business stage levels. Right now, the Women's Business Collective, we're organized, not only by alphabetical order, but, by industries and by different regions in Illinois. But right now, we're currently working on, the different business stage levels before building out this like internal CRM. Another way of measuring, effectiveness of cross-sector, collaborations and support networks is me just looking at the data collection, that, I've been doing with the assistant with one of my, colleagues. So, I've been wanting to do it for a long time, and I finally got to do it, late last year. But, I'm just taking a look at like, all these events, like, who's been attending, these events of the month-long celebrations that I've been leading, tailored for women entrepreneurs. So, just looking at the data, I'm seeing a huge difference of women from different minority communities. And so, I noticed one community, their participation, has been very low. And that's where, I need to set up meetings with their community leaders and my colleagues just to find out, have these events been shared with, women entrepreneurs, in their communities? Is there something that, we need to do, from the state level, from our end to get more participation, such as do we host events like during the evenings? Does a weekend work? Also have to work with, my colleague, like, do we even have them on our mailing list? Also, I have to do the same, regions, looking, I'm seeing, certain regions outside Chicagoland with, a higher participation rate. I see certain neighborhoods in Chicago. Also looking at the data, I've seen, the bulk of attendees have been are in the growth stage. So they've been in business for over 3 years, but just have to see like, do we need to do something else or create different programming, to help support women entrepreneurs at those different stage levels. And then also I'm, looking at the industry, so one thing that I noticed is that the majority of attendees attending woman focused events have been in the food and beverage industries. So, having all this diverse data, allows a balanced approach, for me to see, things from different angles and to compare and contrast findings across the measures, to reveal these patterns and gaps that I otherwise, would have missed.
Yeah, it sounds like, Michelle, you are constantly doing this work, which I really appreciate. So you're communicating, collaborating, convening, and constantly making sure that you're asking the right questions and addressing them through data. I really want to thank you both. What I want to do right now is we've started to get some really great questions in our Q&A pod. So I am going to start looking at some of those, and Jessica, if you have ones that you want to focus on with me, happy to do that. But we will make sure that we try to get to the questions that we can address in today's session. So I'll start with some of the ones that I think really dovetail nicely with some of the conversations that we've been having. Are there any meaningful changes or critical factors that you believe traditional KPIs can't capture, but you're still paying attention to them? And I'll start with, I was going to say, Thom, I'll start with you. Give Michelle a tiny break.
Sure. So yeah, when we consider, let me step back, think about what our function is, right? We are with our grantees throughout their life cycle, this journey that they're on. So their needs change, and we become aware of, deficits in the ecosystem based upon those, what we witness them going through. So we get engaged very early, but then we can see very quickly, oh, you know what? workforce development inadequacies, right? They can't find enough of people of a certain skill set, right? So this kind of informs, again, over on the ecosystem side of the house, maybe we'll do partnering with our small business development centers and, fund certain specific workforce training programs. Is, intellectual property protection, is that a consistent issue? Great. Let's plug into the free law clinics that are being offered at, Duke and Carolina and State. Um, you know, Facility, do we have a consistent need for bench space, and where some of our deep tech, companies have to go. So we monitor from a data standpoint, like how much inventory is out there. And we have partners that we fund that do exactly that. So these aren't in our direct core KPIs, but as we work with these companies that, we fund and we help them, and obviously it's in our interest to see them be wildly successful, we try to always see what other data points can inform other activities. And sometimes it can be just as simple as leveraging our network, right? We have our email list is about 14,000. We have an open rate that averages about 55%. So it's a very engaged list. And so it's as simple as somebody saying, hey, we're doing something out here in Western North Carolina, which, was, ravaged recently by Hurricane Helene. And so we have a lot of founders trying to recover, restart, and relaunch. So we can use our networks and say, okay, let's get that information out here. And I will tell you, because we track every email we drop, when it's something like that, we see a spike in open rates, forward rates, engagement rates, click-throughs, and things like that. So I think that's if you have the good fortune to be in an organization that, has the bandwidth to pay attention to those kinds of data points, you can also then incorporate them and certainly do what you can. I mean, we can't do everything, but we'll do what we can with what we have if it's still in furtherance with our mission.
Really appreciate that. And Michelle, jump in if you have sort of things that you're doing beyond traditional KPIs. And it also nicely sort of dovetails with another set of questions we have, which are around, if you are a sort of an emerging entrepreneurial ecosystem and you have more traditional investors or economic developers, it's hard to showcase, huge economic growth in year one. So, the question asks, are there sort of storytelling methods or other approaches that can sort of maybe really show the impact of these startups so that they have stronger support and advocacy from local government and economic developers?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, both of you, yeah, it is hard to capture all that data, especially, with our limited teams. And, I'm only speaking on behalf of just what I collect. Like, I can't speak on behalf of my colleague. One of my colleagues, she's the state's liaison to the Latinx and Hispanic owned entrepreneurial ecosystem, great work. I have other colleagues, the Black entrepreneurial ecosystem, the AAPI, and they do great work. They have their different type collective, but I've only been speaking what I've been collecting. But to help, showcase that, work or, as I think I mentioned earlier, I did it for the first time in October, going to have a new version later this year. Is this like that infographic highlighting, different data points, within, my state agency. And that's where, I invited other offices to share their data. And, and I've reached out to some other agencies outside our economic, engine to share, like their programs with their sport. And I think with seeing that infographic, and I'm excited, once we're able to release it, next one, I think it just, seeing all the impact, and, at 1 or 2 pages, and, it's just like, wow, this is what, that's been able to be done. And then also, to help, to help entrepreneurs, we developed, and again, as going back, I said, we're in-house entrepreneurs, developed, the most in-depth cross-sector resources tool, in the state. And it's branded as a, connecting her to Illinois business resources. But, many of the resources are for, entrepreneurs from all genders. But it's just a wealth of, information. And, the data geek in me would love to see, once a person, clicks on that, are they, able to follow through? But we just don't have that, mechanism to be able to, to track that. But yeah, we do have that tool, that we empower. And of course, me and my colleagues throughout the state, we're connectors. So we're always, connecting entrepreneurs and cross-sector stakeholders to the people that they need to meet.
I really appreciate what you're saying is like data sharing, both collection and sharing are really important if you want to showcase sort of impact, because there's so many different ways to tell the story of impact. I wanted to ask another question that's inspired by something in the chat, but also in the Q&A, which is, we're seeing lots of new and emergent technology. So if your state has, certain sectors that you've traditionally invested in, how do you make sure you're not missing one and investing in those founders who are in emerging technology sectors or in those sectors that have a lot of potential to grow in the state? And I think one of the ones that's mentioned is sort of the quantum workforce, but we know this administration has invested in lots of chips development, semiconductors, so there's innovation hubs that are popping up. So Thom, I'll start with you.
So we're agnostic.
Mhm.
So we don't have a sector specificity or preference. Our highest gate, or what I say tongue in cheek, is the list of things we wouldn't fund is actually shorter. And that is we won't fund pharma, medical, device, things that have to go through clinical trials, because our resources are just a drop in a bucket, right? And we can't realistically, if you've got a 10-year cycle to market, we can't realistically claim impact there, right? But to the point of how to prioritize, regardless of sector, I just put in the chat a link to a report that the North Carolina Secretary of State published in August. I called it the silent bombshell because it didn't get nearly enough attention that it should have. But they actually did a study on nascent firms in the state of North Carolina and realized that if we helped only 5% become what was self-defined as economically self-sufficient, which was it was either 50,000 in annual revenue or 100,000. The economic impact of the state of North Carolina would be 1.5 to $2 billion annually. And that would also increase job production by 24,500-ish, somewhere in that ballpark, right? And what's important for everybody on this call that's in the kind of economic development world from a practice standpoint is think about, when your state is recruiting a big established company to move there. And the promise of that move is like, oh, and they'll bring, 4,000 jobs and they're going to invest $1 billion on a new plant. By the way, that investment is not a public asset. You're not having your niece's quinceanera, in the lobby, that beautiful crystal glass lobby on a Saturday. That's cost of doing business. They got to build that factory anyhow. But they'll still get a $100 million incentive package. Yet here in every state, I'm sure it's the same, just at a different scale. In North Carolina, there's an incredible job creation engine hiding in plain sight, and it's sector independent. And for us, it's everything from ag, text, everything. We just have to have the discipline and the political will to go do it, right? And go help these nascent founders on the fringe go from 2 to 8 employees because they're growing, right? And if you do that long enough, and I do this just to be a jerk, I say we'll eventually create companies that other states will try to steal from us over time.
Really appreciate that. It's, best place to do business for everyone. I wanted to come back to you, Michelle. There's a question in here that I think you probably are well suited to address, which is, what factors besides funding are the businesses that you see working to overcome? What are the barriers beyond funding that you're seeing?
So one of the barriers, the top one, is not having that social capital. So again, not having, the sponsors, whether, they're not in the room who are going to speak up on behalf of them, advocating those businesses, the mentors who are guiding them, and then just the networks, knowing another woman business owner, the entrepreneur who's, in the same business, having the same challenges. And so that's why, one of the things, I had the blessing of doing was creating the social capital for her guide in Illinois. And so it has like a wide range of different mentoring programs, which are also known as cohorts, fellowships, so accelerators, has the networking different networking opportunities, and it's based on like regions by industries. Going back to your earlier discussion about some of these emerging or top industries, I also include Illinois' top, some of our top industries that was just mentioned actually in our 5-year plan, which I just put in the chat, but one of them is the quantum. So Illinois, we were the first state that had the quantum accelerator, which is, the University of Chicago, takes the lead. And actually I just promoted, their applications are coming up. And so, I just recently had that, in the last e-news. But yeah, for me, outside financial capital, it's that social capital, not having those networks.
Yeah, building those social capital networks is definitely an important one. There's a couple of very specific questions that I think are more related to sort of the startup that the folks are in. I think, all the URLs that we can share, we're doing so in the chat. One last question before I kind of ask my final question to you both is, what is the platform through which you're capturing this data? Is it AI, what are you doing and how are you doing it?
So we've built custom systems, and it's all on a Salesforce backend. It was Foundations Connect, which was the plugin. That's now Salesforce is discontinuing support for that. So we're being forced to migrate. I think in August we're going to do the push. But we do, because we are a PF, a private foundation, giving money to for-profit companies. That's very tricky, as the IRS tried to shut us down for doing that a few years ago, but we prevailed. So there's a lot of expenditure responsibility that we have to do, tracking of dollars, meeting milestones, and update reports. So over the years, we've built a custom system, like I said, on Salesforce to do everything for us. And we're not using AI. We've done a couple skunkwork projects. The problem with AI is we can't take all of our gross applications and just dump them out into the public sandbox, because there's a lot of proprietary information. So we're working on a project now where we might develop our own sandbox to evolve, but we're certainly seeing AI in the application process. I mean, I would say we're probably at 40% and we ask, it's part of the application process. We ask, and it's not a plus or minus factor in the evaluation. We're just interested, and it's yet another data point we're tracking.
Michelle, what are you using in terms of platforms?
At our state agency, we utilize Salesforce, and then and from my previous experiences in the private and nonprofit sector, where we also use Salesforce, so other CRM platforms, we were very in those sectors very data driven, very data, lots of data. But coming into government, I know we don't have the bandwidth to collect all that, and also just our certain layers. So until we have that bandwidth to collect what I want to collect in Salesforce, I also have to keep some things internally with internal CRM. But otherwise, we use Salesforce like many other organizations.
So I wanted to ask each of you one last question, maybe a minute each to answer, and then I would also ask you, if you could share the resources that you have in addition to what you put in the chat that might be helpful for our attendees. I will start with you, Thom. What advice would you give to other organizations that are just beginning to implement KPI-driven approaches to entrepreneurial support? And I'll ask Michelle the same.
I would encourage you strongly to do it, especially at the beginning, because it's much easier to do at the beginning. I have had at past organizations where they have neglected or undervalued the benefits of KPIs and then had to kind of retrofit. It's a lot harder. It's a lot more expensive. So if you are kind of in your early stages, start now. Ask more than you think you need to, track a little bit more. And if you're collecting data points that are not actionable, that's our gold standard here. We don't ask for a piece of data if it's not going to inform an action or a decision. So if you've been asking for something you're not acting on, then you can discontinue it, right? But you can't go back in time and ask for something that you wish you had and you hadn't. So be a little bit aggressive at the beginning, do it now, and then monitor how you're using that data, cut the stuff that you're not acting on, and then just keep going.
Thank you. Michelle, same question.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to implement it, first do your research and do inventory of your organizations just to see, is there a date, you have this data? Because I know some sectors, kind of work in silos. So first make sure you have, do your research. And then second, do research of similar data that you would like to do. So like for me, when I came on board, I was showing, this is what other organizations are doing. This is what, entrepreneurial publications, what they're collecting, because that will help, help get you that support of why you're wanting to do this. And then next, you want to get buy-in not only from your direct supervisors, but also for your colleagues, to show them this is what I want, and this is going to be the importance, and this is going to how it's going to bring value, for all of us. Also start small, because it might seem very drastic if you've not implemented KPI approaches before, and then all of a sudden you want to go to this next level. So, start small. And then lastly, show the data to tell that story of the impact of the work that you and your cross-sector stakeholders are doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Thom, and thank you, Michelle. I know we're very much out of time, but I wanted to thank you both for coming and sharing your experiences, insights, and practices, what you're doing, what you're learning. And I think you've both sort of shared so much also in the chat, and if folks want to reach out. And same for me, if anyone wants to learn about the work that I do, I'm always happy to connect. So thank you, and I'll hand it back to Jessica.
Well, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you to our panel. I saw lots of questions specifically about the organizations you both lead. And so I will, this is a ploy to get more newsletter signups, but in our next newsletter, January 30th, Thom and Michelle, I will be happy to feature any and all information about your programs in our newsletter. Saw questions about, what kind of companies qualify, et cetera. We want this, to Thom's point about don't ask it if it's not actionable. We would like these webinars to be actionable for you. So if you're an entrepreneur, a policymaker, anything in between, we hope that this has been helpful. So thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, February 16th.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Take care.